Alright guys, welcome back to another video. So this is not going to be a tutorial video or anything like that. This is mainly just kind of update video, but also with some little projects and that thrown in that might actually be useful to some people. So I've been really trying to get into chair making lately, and I'm trying to make sure that I get into it in the absolute best way possible. Unlike a lot of other stuff that I've done in the past where I've done a little bit of research and then just jumped into a project and kind of bought stuff as I needed it, for this specific goal of just trying to get into making chairs, I've gone through and I've done a ton of research on all the different styles. I've already bought a ton of different tools and that I needed, going all the way back to December when I bought my lathe. Now, those of you that have been following me for a while, you saw that I started turning some bowls in that, and that was a pretty cool use of the lathe, but that's not what I bought the lathe for. If I was buying a lathe for bowl turning, I would not have bought this lathe. But my goal when I purchased that lathe was purely to get into chair making because of the fact that it is just a simple, cheap lathe that has a nice long bed with the bed extension, all that. It's going to allow me a lot of flexibility to do the stuff that I want. And so before I can get into the process of making all these different types of chairs that I want to make, I have to make it. There's a few different jigs and tools basically that I need to put together. So the first thing is a bigger tool rest for my lathe. One of the biggest problems I've had so far when I've tried to turn spindles on that lathe with my little 6-inch tool rest is I can't get good consistent lengths of wood there. They always end up getting lumpies and bumpies, and it's really hard to go back in and even them all out. So one of the very common things I've found chair makers doing is they just build these wooden tool rests for their lathe. Then it gives you the ability to run the tool all the way down the length of that workpiece. So it's a much better way of working. And one thing that's very important to mention about all of these different jigs that I'm making is these are just going to be the first attempts at them. In the future, I already plan to upgrade these if I decide to get more into this chair making thing. Alright, so the tool rests for the lathe are now completed. We have 3 different sizes, so basically a small, a medium, and a large, and each one covers about a 10-inch range there. And so the small one does anything about 12 1/4 to 22 inches long. The medium one does 22 up to 31 3/4, and then the large one does 31 1/4 up to 41 1/2, which is basically the maximum piece that I can fit in the lathe here. And so the reason I made 3 separate ones rather than trying to, you know, mix and match them is because I want to make sure that they're as stable as possible. And I played around with these a little bit already, and I have to say they're going to be an awesome way to work. Because the benefit here is when you're using your roughing gouging knife, when you're turning a spindle, you want to make sure you're making nice fluid movements. And you can't do that with these short, you know, tool rests that normally come with a lathe. The one that came with my lathe was about 6 inches long. So you're working, so on a 40-inch long spindle, let's say, you're working 6 inches at a time, trying to get it all down to the same dimensions. It just, every time I've tried to do that in the past, it never came out looking nicely. Whereas here, all I have to do is mount my blank in the lathe here, and I can just walk all the way along the length of the lathe, cutting that piece all in one pass. It's just going to make it really awesome to get everything dialed in, and it just means I don't have to constantly be fiddling around with a tool rest. And so the next thing we're going to work on is the laser drilling guides. Now this is an idea created by Greg Pennington. He's a Windsor chair maker down somewhere in the US. I don't quite remember where he's from, but he came up with this really awesome method for drilling angled holes into Windsor chairs, or just generally drilling angled holes. And all you do is you just use 2 laser levels, one set at a perfect 90 degrees and one set at whatever angle you want to drill at. You align those 2 lasers, and that gives you a perfect guide when you're hand drilling those holes, or, you know, using a power drill. And so I already went out and picked up 2 of these laser levels here, and so all we need to do now is just build a couple bases for them, because we're going to mount these on bases, make sure we have some handles in that so we can set them to specific angles and all that. And then we're just going to kind of go from there. So these shouldn't be a super complex thing, but I just want to make sure that you guys know that this is not my original design. This is a genius idea from Greg Pennington. And there will be a link to the blog post where he wrote about these down in the description below. So I highly recommend you go check that out, because it really is a genius idea. And in that blog post, he goes over a bunch of other details about, you know, drilling holes for Windsor chairs. And so there'll be a link to it down in the description below. There's a lot of good information. I highly recommend checking it out. All right, so those are our two little simple laser drilling guide jigs all made and ready to go, as well as a little angle template. Now, this angle template that I made here, I stole directly from Greg Pennington's blog post because I have no idea what angles need to be used in Windsor chair making. So I'm just gonna try the three that he had in the picture on that blog post and just see if they work for me. I think that they're gonna work. Again, I have no idea what I'm doing here. I'm just kind of going off of what I can find around the internet. So these are the only angles I've been able to specifically find online. So I'm gonna try them out. So we've got a 14, 18, and 23 degree, all for different components in that. And so I did a quick test there with some 3/8 dowel just in this piece of MDF, and that worked perfectly. I've got a clean hole all the way through. Perfect angle. You can see that this dowel is just protruding nicely at 18 degrees, and I checked that with my little crappy protractor here. Honestly, it's really hard to tell with that round hole in there, but I know that it's close enough to that 18 degrees for anything that I'm ever going to try and deal with here. So that is exactly what I'm going to be trying to achieve, just on a larger scale with some bigger bits and obviously some turn components. And so the last thing I want to put together today is a steam box for attempting anyway to steam bend some wood. So the problem I'm going to face here in Calgary is that I don't have good access to air-dried quality lumber. So I have woods like birch, a lot of different pines, poplars, all that kind of stuff. And I have heard some rumors of things like cherry, hickory, even some maple and some elm being available around here. But overall, the only lumber that I have access to is kiln dried. So I'm going to try my best. I found a lot of different articles in that online about ways you can still steam bend in that with kiln dried lumber. But yeah, it's definitely going to be some trial and error to figure that out. But I want to start by just making the steam box so that I have something to start working off of. And so just like everything else here, this steam box I'm going to be making is very much so a first gen version. Because what I'm going to be using is some pressure treated pine. Now, nowhere on the internet have I ever found anyone saying that you can do it this way, but I'm going to guess that it might work temporarily, and it was by far the cheapest option, even compared to just buying a PVC pipe, which is also another very common option. Because in total, for the two boards that I needed for the steam box, it was just under 20 bucks. So we've got a 1/2 inch thick piece of white oak and a 3/8 thick piece of ash. So when I put these into the forms last night, I checked them with my moisture meter here, and they were reading about a 20% moisture content. When I came back into the shop this morning, they're at about 8%. So I'm going to take them out of the clamps and just see how we did here. So both of these, I would say, actually came out pretty good. We have a nice gentle curve to them. There is a decent amount of spring back, like you can see if I just hold it up to the form there. there's a lot of spring back there. And so what I can kind of start to figure out here is the amount of spring back that you get. So here what I can do is I can just measure the amount of spring back that happened on these pieces, and I can scale that up to whatever piece I'm working on. So say I'm trying to get a specific 18-inch radius off for this back slat here. Now all I need to do is just make that circle slightly smaller so that it's a tighter curve. So make it 16 or even go down to like 14 inches so it's a much tighter curve. That way when you get that spring back, it opens up to be that 18-inch radius. So it's really just going to be some trial and error, but I would say that worked out well. We now have a piece that is pretty much permanently locked in that curved shape there. That is almost the perfect shape, I would say, for a back slat as it is. So, and it worked out on both the 1/2 inch and the 3/8 piece. So now one of the important things people say to check for when you're using kiln dried wood is for any checking or that happens on the inside. So any stress fractures, anything like that. And so far I can't really see anything on here. Especially on the white oak is where it seems to be more common. So the ash looks just about perfect. And then same thing on the white oak. I don't see any stress fractures or anything that came in. So overall, I would say that's extremely successful. And yeah, so I've got a whole bunch of more learning and testing to do with the steam box before I can actually use it on a project. But anyway, that stuff will all be coming up in the future here. And, oh yeah, and so one thing I forgot to mention, don't use pressure-treated pine for your steam box. It doesn't work. What happened when the box started heating up is I started noticing that the pine resin, that's the stuff that is naturally in pine, started coming out either on the top or on the inside. There's a few spots where it dripped onto my pieces. So overall, just it doesn't really work. You're definitely going to want to use like cedar, plywood, or white oak, something that's a much better quality material. So yeah, that's a little side note, a little learning lesson that I already just learned. So anyways, guys, I do hope you enjoyed this video, just putting together all these different jigs here. And as always, guys, I will see you in the next one.